Hello and welcome to the 21 for 21 podcast, 21 lessons for sport media in the 21st century, lesson 8 today. And in a few moments' time, we're going to be talking to Tom Carter, who works in the world of sports social media. And we'll get a good chat with him about what it is he does and how he got there. Before, though, I'll introduce myself as ever. I'm Jamie Coles and I'm a sport journalist. And I'm here as ever with Stuart Levy.
Sorry, I'm missing my cue there. So I'm Stuart Levy, sports marketer based here in Germany.
We spoke on episode 4?
Three.
It's
such a big back catalogue now. We're losing count.
About Netflix series and Netflix sports series. And we talked about the importance of those series. We had some great guests. We had Chris Hull and Richard Kaufman.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about the importance of those series, about building fan bases and maintaining that fan base. And this weekend, or just last weekend, was the America's Grand Prix, Formula One. We're at the Circuit of the Americas. And just to reinforce that point, I think in 2018, so pre-pandemic, there were 264,000 fans at the Circuit of the Americas to watch the Formula One. Just last weekend, post, or I don't know, we're still in the pandemic era. I'm not sure if we're still in ongoing pandemic-wise, but there were 400,000 fans, and so that's up almost 50%. And of course, during this era of the pandemic, we've had 2 series of Drive to Survive come out, and I think that we can see that Netflix effect, shall we call it?
Yeah, no, as we spoke about on that episode, these one of the purposes is from Formula One, the rights holder point of view is to get the new fans, and what better way of showing the new fans and these grandstands at the circuit in Austin being so much fuller than they were in the last comparable race before the pandemic. So it really is interesting to see. Yeah, it's great that we've got the numbers on social media talking about the series, but then putting their money where their mouth is and going to check out the sport is really, really interesting to see.
Yeah, and I can say with quite a fair bit of confidence that a lot of motorsport are looking to the United States as a market for growth in the coming years. So sure, Formula One rights holders and organisers will be very happy about that.
Oh yeah,
so
definitely.
if you are interested in that, do check out episode 3, which was all about Netflix series. Today, though, episode 8, lesson 8 already of our little podcast, and I'd love to introduce you to Tom Carter. Tom works for Samba, who are a social media agency. Am I right in thinking that that's the kind of best way to introduce them? In fact, I'm going to hand over to Tom right away, and you can tell us what Samba do and what you do there.
Sure. So we're essentially a localization agency. So we work in social, we work in web content and online and offline digital content as well. So we essentially work with rights holders, clubs, leagues, all sorts of different brands across sport, mostly specializing in how we can, expand their audiences to different global markets, work in non-domestic markets with localization of existing content. We're moving now more into the creation of original content. So my role is social media manager for the English markets. So I work kind of a split between European clients and US clients. So I work a lot in France with the French League, Ligue 1, with clubs such as PSG, Monaco, Lille, Lyon. And then I work with a number of European soccer clubs who have a presence in the US on the US strategy, and a number of clients who are based in the US as well. So we have a very broad spectrum. We have around 150 collaborators in different territories all over the world. So our niche really is having specialized content creators and PR managers who are based in the market that they're working within. So, for example, if a brand in Europe doesn't quite have the presence in the US that they need, they would maybe partner with us because we've got people on the ground there, people who are experts in localization, creating content, building contacts with the club for offline activation, sponsorship and sales and things like that. And traditionally, the company, I've been there since March, but they probably, I think it's true, they specialize more in Latin markets. So they have a heavy footprint for, Hispanic audiences, Spanish speaking, Portuguese, this kind of thing. But in recent times, especially the last 6 months since I've been there, I've been more focused in the US and expansion within Europe as well. So all my clients are based in football because that's kind of where my background is. but we work with a number of different sports. So we work with F1, we work in tennis with Roland Garros, and beyond that, we've got a large footprint in different areas. More now, we're focusing obviously on things like esports and different areas, like with emerging markets and opportunities within that. So it's just a real broad spectrum of clients and opportunities. But like I said, my day-to-day is more focused on football, which is fine as a big football fan and someone who's worked in football for 5 years. It's quite a nice fit.
There's a lot to unpack there. So I'm gonna try to chase you up on the basics maybe of localization for listeners that, and you've touched on it. You kind of said that if if a certain brand wants to move into a new market such as Americas, then you'll connect them with someone on the ground there. But what does it really like? What's the nitty gritty in a kind of a basic for anyone that doesn't know what localization is?
Sure. So, for example, if you take let's take a Premier League Football Club X. Let's say that they're obviously specialised in their domestic market. They've got a team who are fantastic at engaging with audiences in the UK in English, but maybe they have players in their squad who are household names in Brazil, for example, and they want to produce content in Portuguese. So lots of clubs do this already. It's a pretty bread and butter thing. But instead of maybe just having someone who is a native Portuguese speaker, they would work with our agency or an agency like us to create targeted specific content for the Portuguese market. So analysing what is it that a Portuguese football fan wants to see, why is it that they relate to this player or to the club. Ultimately, it's about growth. It's about growing eyeballs on the properties of the club, growing social media audience, and then obviously beyond that, once you have an engaged audience and you can back that up with data, then that's when you can start to think about commercial partnerships. So we're our place is kind of, if you think a bit of it like a funnel, we're quite close to the start. We're the bread and butter day-to-day, 365 days a year engagement with fans in a particular market, particular language. But I think once you kind of grow the brand awareness and then you have the customer acquisition, then you start to turn those into brand advocates. That's when we kind of start to have a more long-term relationship with our clients and building out more sort of meaningful content strands and really kind of engaging with fans on a more meaningful basis.
Okay, so on a basic level, like you say, so rather than if a Premier League football club really cares about getting into Brazil, rather than just having a Portuguese guy translate things word for word, it's finding out what the fans in Brazil actually want to see and ensuring that it's the right content. So you sort of hire and hire the collaborators to work with you in the markets, or you create the content yourself, and what your current role is.
Exactly. So kind of we have, there's different parts of the business. We have, PR, we have a huge design team as well. So we like to see ourselves as we're obviously an external resource, but we like to, where possible, consider ourselves and work with clubs and our clients as if we're kind of an extension of their team. But this is something that has been more true now with the pandemic than other times because, we're based remotely, just like the people that we're working with. So, for example, one of my clients who previously might have been in an office together for 10, 15 years. Now they're all working separately in different places, in some different parts of the world in some cases. So it's not so much of a stretch to work with an agency like ours, where we've got people like myself in Europe and people I collaborate with in Argentina and in the States and everything else. So we really kind of try and build ourselves into this relationship where we are just a simple extension of their team, as if we're in an office next to theirs, which is LATAM or Spanish or Portuguese or the US or something like that. So the way that we work on a day-to-day basis is, yes, we have collaborators in different areas, so people that usually have a long-term relationship. It's not just the fact that they're based in a particular market. So if we keep going with the Premier League Portuguese example, it's not good enough maybe just to have someone who's a native Portuguese speaker, because there's two facets. Number one is that you need to have a really good understanding of social media, because that's kind of our most of our focus is. Or if it's web content, it's journalistic. If it's creating original video content, we need videographers who understand how to produce a video, understand narrative, all these kind of things. And then I think the second thing is understanding the marketplace. So if we're working with a football club, the people that we work with need to be big football fans. They need to have an understanding not just of the brand of the client that we're working with, but how like-minded brands and competitors work in that space. So it's I think it's quite a long process to find, to tick all of those boxes, to have someone who is, understands all those points. But because we work so long in these markets, we do tend to have very good contacts. The collaborators that we work with tend to stay with us and work with us across multiple projects. And I think that's how the company, like I said, I've only been there for 6 months, so I can't take much credit for this at all, but that's how Sambra Digital has kind of built its reputation. And and I think it reflects a change in the market, right? Because it wasn't that long ago that localization or targeting new audiences meant, Jamie, it's kind of like subtitling a video, sticking some subtitles on a 20-minute video, and it's like, oh, here's your targeted content. But that's not good enough, is it? You need to have a much broader spectrum of targeted content, from web, social, PR, video, obviously, and then delving down into the nuances of every platform. So, like, the content that you produce on TikTok for the Portuguese market will be different for YouTube, will be different for own channels like website and everything else. So, I think you have to have an understanding of how digital works, as well as social, as well as the football audiences and everything else.
This is quite. We're going to talk about you specifically in a minute and what you do, but this is really, you grabbed my interest. Sambra seem quite pervasive almost. That you said they've got this widespread network all over the world. They're doing everything from social media, PR, original content. They're kind of a bit everywhere, but a lot of what they do really is behind the scenes. It's completely unseen by most of the world, and certainly even like, I don't know, to take a Premier League club, for example, Manchester United, and that most Manchester United fans, as far as I'm as an English speaker concerned, will only see the English content. We won't see all the other languages or all the localized content, and because I guess it's geo-blocked or it's sent specifically to those accounts. And so it's kind of like this invisible work that we only see one part of at any given moment, and you're kind of there working away behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, I suppose it depends on the goals and the objectives of the club, right, or the client. Because, so for example, like going back, previous years where I said localization didn't really mean much. It was kind of a nice to have. It was a sort of like, okay, we've signed a player from Argentina. We know that that's going to bring us more eyeballs from Argentina and South America. But really, what is a club doing? What is a client doing to engage with that audience fully? It's a big operation to do that properly. It's exactly the same as it would be for your domestic market. But the global marketplace changes so quickly. That's why you need people on the ground. You need good agency relationships. You need to understand that audience, because it doesn't have the same sort of touch points as a domestic audience. You're not talking to fans who live 5 miles from the ground who are going every week. You're talking to people who maybe don't have those kind of touch points on a regular basis. So I think on the one hand, it's the aim really with what we do, and the thing that I keep running to my mind is, how do we engage? So if Premier League Club X, let's say they're based in London, how do we make fans in New York City feel as close to that brand as the fans in London do? The people who go to the ground every week, who've got a season ticket. How do we engage with fans in Kuala Lumpur or New York or Sao Paulo in exactly the same way, and make them feel connected and engaged with the brand, in the same way as if they were living 5 miles from the ground?
And I guess that could be sorry, Jamie, in a number of different ways. Like, there's no point in having a Twitter feed, and all it does is advertise tickets, because you're right, those fans in New York and Kuala Lumpur, they won't feel valued because they can't get to the game. So you're right, making sure that they feel part of the club, and as much is linked directly to them as possible, I'm sure is the best way, like you've been saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on the club, depends on that, the brand differentiation you have. So it's difficult, for example, if you're a small club with a small footprint, and if you don't have those local points of reference, you don't have those players in the squad who are from Argentina, for example. But then also, if you're a big brand, so if you're in a top 6 Premier League club, for example, how do you differentiate yourself from the other top 6? Because if you think of fans in, let's say, in Indonesia, for example, they just, like us, if we're British and we want to find an NFL team for the start of the NFL season, well, we're probably going to go to someone like New York Patriots, or someone who wins every week. Someone's going to be in the Super Bowl, right? So that's the same for any sport. And if you're an Indonesian fan, you think, well, I'll support Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal. So if you're one of those clubs, how do you differentiate from the other 5 biggest clubs that are going to be playing in the Champions League every week that have the biggest players? So that's when that's why you need that kind of local partnership to go, well, okay, so in Indonesia, this is what turns fans on. This is what they engage with. This is the kind of content they like. These are the kind of values they have as a demographic. And this is how it links to your brand. So, it could be something about, the history of a club. It could be something about, the diversity of the playing squad or something like that. What are the brand values that can be connected with different audiences? And huge area. So it's, it's quite an expansive strategy you need, I think.
So I feel like we could go further and further in depth on
Your whole episode just on localization.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And maybe we should. Maybe Tom could put us in touch with someone else from Samba, or come on again and talk about localization in far more depth, because this is a world that I was largely unaware of. Like you say, Tom, part of Tom and I worked together briefly. We crossed over briefly at Barca, and part of my work is, and our work when we were working together, was to like subtitle or translate things to make sure it was accessible to different markets. But I kind of had no real experience about localization or anything like that. So this episode, to kind of bring it back around, was going to be a part of this series that we're doing. It's kind of inline series that you want to work in sport media. The first episode, I explained a bit about how I got into sport media and what it is I do. So in that world of localization and everything that Samba does, Tom, you said you do social media. Could you maybe go into a bit more depth about your day-to-day work? And I guess no 2 days are the same, but
no, I mean, no 2 minutes
maybe.
are the same, really, working in social. I mean, so like I said, my split is probably 50-50 between the US and Europe. So my day will probably start around like 9:30 in the morning, and my first thing is really working. I mean, looking at what's going on in the world of football, really, looking for new trends and things like that. It's the kind of thing I do with a coffee in the morning. It's not too intensive, just kind of keeping an eye on things. Usually, like I said, because I work in the US, I kind of go back and see what our guys in the US have been doing while I was asleep, and then planning my day. So I guess it's the way that we structure our work with clients is, I don't know what the split is here, but it's kind of, some of it's reactive, some of it's in the moment. Obviously, there's a trend, we want to take advantage of it. There's news, obviously we follow the news narrative of the domestic markets of our clients. So there's a training session, a player is injured, there's a new transfer, could be anything. And then I say the second part of that is probably something that's a bit more strategic, thinking about more long term. So for example, I say for a French client, I know that we've got a derby in 2 months. So it's like, well, what's the content that we're creating around that? So if that French club has, 3 or 4 Turkish players in the side or something, what are we going to do that's going to engage with the Turkish market around that game? How are we going to be prepared if one of those players scores a hat trick? So I can say I work with PSG. That's one of the clients that we work with extensively in different markets. So they've just had Le Classique this weekend with Marseille. So we had a lot of content prepared. Obviously, if the club won, they drew, unfortunately. But how are we going to take advantage at the moment if Messi scores an overhead kick in the 93rd minute and they win 1-0? What are we going to do if Neymar, Mbappe, and Messi will get on the score sheet and they win 3-0? It's those kind of things. It's kind of preempting the points of engagement where we know there's going to be lots of people watching our account. There's going to be lots of interest in the league and all this kind of stuff. And then I suppose the third part then would be wider activations that aren't related to any specific moment. So, for example, we're bread and butter. We do lots of competitions and things like that to grow our accounts. It's like a retweet and follow, something like this. So, which partners in particular markets are we gonna partner with to improve the reach of our accounts? So if we stay on the idea of the Turkish players with one of our clients, for example, well, how are we going to engage with the Turkish media to amplify a competition we have that's going to bring new followers to our account with a signed shirt or something, or a trip to come to a game, these kind of things. So like I said, because we've got that local market knowledge and we're embedded usually with really good contacts in different markets, whether it's broadcasters, influencers, content brands, etc. We try and we have a 365-day a year content strategy where we're engaging in many different points. So I suppose, like I said, to sum up, my day-to-day is somewhat reactive, somewhat long-term planning. It's never the same, as you say. And because we work with so many different clients in so many different markets, the needs and the day-to-day can change very rapidly. But that's what I enjoy about it. I think that's ultimately, that's one of the good things about working agency side. And I've been lucky to work with a few different agencies where, you can drop something down and pick something up that's completely different within an hour, and you're doing something very different where you're learning different skills and everything else. So yeah, that diversity is something I like.
So I'll mute Jamie there. Classic mistake. Episode 8. We're still not quite figured it all out yet.
Thank you, Stuart. So without getting too much into the sort of sensitivities of it, how much freedom to create do you have? How much freedom to plan and execute things that in the way that you feel is best based on your knowledge and experience, and how much comes from the client end?
It's a good question. I think we're lucky at Samba that all the clients we work with are fantastic in that regard. They give us a completely free remit. Obviously, I mean, in exactly the same way as if we were club side, we can propose what we want. We can come up with as many ideas. You know, like if you're working at Barcelona, you had an idea for something, the club would love for you to be creative and propose something, but the actual final point of execution and publication, maybe there are other considerations. So we work in exactly the same way. With the guys I manage, the way that I, like to keep it is everything is open, nothing is off the table. Go as wild as you can with your creative ideas, think outside the box, and we'll see where it takes us. I mean, it might be that we get some pushback for one reason or other, something we don't have visibility over, for example. From the offset, it might be something that we execute and we produce, internally, but then we're not quite able to get it over the line, or we change it in some way. So it really depends. But like I said, all the clients that we work with are incredibly encouraging. The reason they work with us is because we have this local market knowledge, so they trust us. They say, well, this is your specialism, that go ahead and create, go ahead and innovate, and this is ultimately the goal. So yeah, I think we have a completely free remit, but we obviously have to take different things into consideration. I suppose that differs from the country that you're operating in, obviously, and like with football, it depends, doesn't it, on the way the team are playing and the narrative over certain things. So as long as we're aware of that and we're sensitive to that, there's never any problems with us proposing new ideas.
Yes, I guess it's pretty obvious, like you say, to have for your PSG account goal graphics for Messi and Neymar and Mbappe. So I think I'm not sure if they still do it now, but I remember the Bayer Leverkusen English language account was famous a couple of years ago for being a banter account, I guess. So the Samba equivalent, who they must have been hired for their agency in the UK, must have found out that the UK market likes that kind of cheeky Twitter side. But how much control do you think, or maybe did Bayer Leverkusen actually have on those tweets that were being put out in the name of Bayer Leverkusen?
I would imagine any brand has it's a very controlled process. They wouldn't just hand over the logins for an account and say go wild. It's got to fit in with the strategy. I can only speak from my experience, and with all the clients we work with, everything we do fits into a very structured strategy. It's not like like I said, it's not like they just go, well, go wild with it and we'll see what happens. I think that thing kind of works for Bayer Leverkusen. We saw AS Roma were really kind of the front runner. What people like Paul Rogers did with that club was fantastic, especially on social. But that again fits into expansion strategy, doesn't it? Because I guess that at some point they've thought, well, we need something that's going to differentiate us. There aren't many clubs doing this. It's an opportunity for us. I do think in those examples, you're best off going in two-footed, going in completely committed to that style. So there's no halfway point really. You either are a banter account or you're not. Now, with some of the clients I work with, that strategy wouldn't really make sense. If you're a large European brand, you don't really want that kind of flexibility, because I don't think that fits with the brand purpose. That doesn't fit with the sense of identity that they have. So it really depends, and I think that one of our roles as an agency is understanding those nuances. So if we're working with a Bayer Leverkusen, well, maybe that would make sense for them. But if we're going to work with a Manchester United or someone like that, maybe it's different. You have to take on board many different considerations.
Yes, I guess Bayer Leverkusen and Roma, to use those two examples, they're probably maybe just below the elite. So the elite maybe has to be more controlled and polished, like you say, and Leverkusen and Roma, they need their niches to be just outside the mainstream to gain new fans. You mentioned the NFL example. You wouldn't support Bayer Leverkusen or Roma from abroad if you wanted to be support team winning trophies, but maybe you might like them for the other reasons. That's a really nice example. Yes, I guess we're still on the localization topic, so I think we're kind of conscious of your time here, Tom. But you certainly seem to know a lot about what you're doing. You seem to be really involved in the industry. But I mean, one of the main reasons I wanted to speak to you is because you I don't think, to my knowledge, study sport or study sports media. You've had a bit of a roundabout route into what you're doing. So
I've been.
Only go, Jamie.
I've been. Tim Ferriss said actually when he was producing his podcast that like interviewing people for a podcast is an excuse to have a snoop on your friends. And so I've been having a nosy around sort of Tom's history, or at least what's available online. And you got a degree in music industry management.
Yeah.
And then you went on and worked for like sort of marketing and PR for various music festivals and concerts, right? So, and you mentioned earlier on in the podcast, actually, the episode that you had been 5 years or so in this sport world. So at some point you went on to work for Deezer as well. Is that right? Did I imagine that? Or
no, that's there. Yeah, I was there.
And that's a big brand in the music world. So at some point you had this. Well, I mean, talk to us how you got into that, maybe, and then at some point you must have had this moment where it's like, you know what, I'm going to step away from this world of music, I step into the world of sport, and to turn your back on a big brand like Deezer. And 5 years ago they were kind of a big moment. They were growing quite a lot. So yeah, how did all that kind of come about?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I did a music industry management degree, which was I think it was the university I went to was the lowest ranked university in the UK, and
that's all right. I went to quite a low ranked university as well, and didn't study sport media or journalism either. So
yeah, so ultimately there's hope for anyone, right? You can pivot into whatever role you want. And you just got to have the drive. So yeah, basically, I mean, I suppose it comes down to when I was growing up, and it's still true now. The only two things I was really passionate about were music and sport, particularly football. So when I was like
straight up a Nick Hornby novel, then no.
Basically, I'm in my old bedroom and I can see my record collection's here, and it's all the records I had when I was 16. The bookshelf's there, and it's like every Nick Hornby novel that's ever come out. I've got 5 copies of High Fidelity and Fever Pitch. That was basically it, really. I mean, that was kind of my blueprint. It was like, well, as long as I work in one of these areas and I can do the other one in my spare time, I'm going to be happy. So yeah, I think because when I was a teenager, I was in bands and stuff, and I thought music would be a bit more interesting. I did a degree in music management because I thought, well, maybe this would keep things open, I mean, so yeah, if I don't become a world famous rock star with a guitar-shaped swimming pool, then maybe there's something to fall back on there. And what I found was, so I did the degree, and then I went to work I worked mostly in music PR. I worked for a promoter for a few years, and then ended up at Deezer. And I just found that, as you know, I mean, the music industry at that point, in 2009, 2010, so about 2014 was just dying out. I mean, the roles I kind of envisaged myself just were at some point no longer going to exist. And I was probably, my main passion was still football. I was going to football every week, and this was also when social media became it wasn't like a niche thing, and it was really for quite around that time. It became an absolute mainstream part of our lives, when smartphones just became completely, habitual. So I suppose what happened then is that I thought, well, I'm on social media all day, every day. I'm a consumer, but I'm also starting to become a professional. And this is now what young people are doing when they become content creators. So they might have a completely different degree or discipline, but their social brand, their personal brand is maybe something that they're going to be able to monetize more easily. So basically what happened was I thought, well, long term, I think sports probably something I'm more comfortable with, actually, and it's going to be a better growth area for my career. So when I was working at Deezer, I guess I was early 20s, and I was living in London, and I really wanted to live abroad. I was hell-bent on living somewhere abroad. So I was taking French lessons because that was my plan, to move to France. And I was basically started bullying Paris Saint-Germain and saying, let me come and work for you. Then I met a girl in the company that I worked with. She was Spanish, and we started a relationship that lasted a good 8-9 years. And after having experiences with her family and friends in Spain, it was like, well, actually, this would be pretty cool as well. So from then, I started doing the same thing with Barca. I noticed that, sensitive topic for you and I, Jamie, but I noticed there are English mistakes on their social media. And I wrote to their digital team and said, well, look, I do this as for a living. I work for a music brand, but I'm the social media manager here, and I'm a big Barca fan. At that point, I was in the Peña, in the supporters club in Barca in London. And look, I'm very happy to work on any basis. I work for free. I don't think WhatsApp existed then, but you can Facebook message me copy, and I'll proof it and correct it, any way you want. And that's how I started working with Barca. So it took a while. It took a couple of months before they got back to me and I had an interview with them. But for a good couple of years, they would send me, long spreadsheets of, marketing copy and, presentations and things to proof. And I was essentially that. I was like a copywriter, a proofer. And I did that in my evenings and weekends and free time when I could at work. Basically with the goal in mind that eventually I would potentially be able to cash that in if I moved to Barcelona and I had a contact with them already. A lot of these big European clubs, especially in Europe, don't advertise jobs. It's not the kind of thing where you can go on Guardian Jobs or LinkedIn and they're looking for people. You kind of need to know people. And I understood that. So that was really my goal, to work with Barca, or to move to Spain and try and make that happen. And just around that time, I managed to get a job in New York. So I ended up kind of putting that on the side for a year, and I went to work in finance for a year in New York, which was something completely different, but a great experience. And then I kind of just picked up that plan when I left there. Really, I was there for a year, and then I moved back to Europe, and I thought, well, I'll base myself in Barcelona, and I'll take any job I can get. I think, the first few days I was handing my CVs in hostels and bars and everything else. And just thought, well, if I bide my time and I can pick up Spanish and everything else, then maybe a job will come available. And I guess it took around 6 months, but that's what happened. And that was the start of my work in football, really. So it was a long process, but I was hell bent on making it happen. Like I said, I worked for free, and I did a little work with Barca in New York, and tried to sort of build contacts in sport and in football, and to get advice. So I would recommend absolutely following that route if you're a young person, or you're someone who wants to maybe consider a different career change. Just reaching out to people on LinkedIn and saying, oh, look, I'm going to be in the area next week. If you have 5 minutes for a coffee, I'd love to spend your ear about something. And you'll be surprised about how many people in the industry would be very receptive to that and be like, yeah, absolutely, of course. Because as you said, Jamie, you're similar to me. I mean, we've sort of moved careers a little bit. We've done lots of different things, and I think it can be a difficult thing to navigate sometimes. So having people that can guide you, give you advice, and maybe be good contacts for you as well is really important.
It's pretty interesting that you say it's PSG and Barca were the clubs you chose to attack and bully, as you say. Do you think it would have been easier to, I don't know, bully French third division teams into getting positions, or was that a conscious decision to say, right, I want to work in sport, I want to work at the top in sport, so that's where I'm going?
It wasn't as considered as that. It was more, I think I went on a weekend with my mates to a gig in Paris and loved it, and thought, well, I'd love to live in Paris. What would be the best job to have in Paris? Well, working in Paris Saint-Germain. And then equally with Barca, I remember going to a music festival and having a weekend in Barca with my mates and being like, wow, this is really cool. The best job to have in Barcelona would be working for Barca. This is in the days when they were, winning the Trident and all the rest of it. So it wasn't really a strategic career thing. It was just like, well, I'd like to live abroad. I suppose I would take a job in a hostel or an Irish bar, but if I could get a job in the social media team at Barca, that would be pretty cool. So it was more that. And I suppose actually you're right. If I was thinking about it more strategically, then starting with smaller brands might have been a better more easier way to do that. But I wasn't didn't have that foresight really.
Or maybe not. Maybe a smaller brand wouldn't be as available to invest into the English market. Or I want to ask you a bit more specifically. What did you do to bully PSG and Barca into giving you work?
Well, the PSG, from memory, and it wasn't just them. I mean, I think I messaged Real Madrid and Atletico as well. Like I said, my goal was really to kind of work abroad. I don't remember the conversation I had with PSG, but I don't think it got very far, because I think it was kind of, well, do you speak French? And I didn't, so that was kind of the end of the conversation. What happened with Barca was, it was actually a kind of coincidence. So I remember vividly, so when I was at Deezer in London, on my lunch break, I had a calendar notification set up every day saying, call Barca. Because it took a long time to get through to them. I mean, there was no, like I said, there was no social media email address or anything like that. It was literally phoning the central, phoning the info line or whatever, and saying in English, listen, can I get through to someone in digital, the social media team? And it took a long, long time. And what happened was, there was a great guy who worked there, and I ended up working with him again for Dugout in one of my later roles, a guy called Joaquin. He did call me back, and he said, well, look, we're about to launch what at the time, I think Barca were the only team doing this. They were considering the launch of their OTT service. So that's obviously something that we worked on a lot later, but it was called, I think, this Barca Video or something like that. And they were looking for maybe an English presence, someone who's a native English speaker to kind of work on that. But again, I think it kind of fell down because of my lack of Spanish at the time. I had zero Spanish, living in London. And so it was kind of a long process. It was kind of putting myself on the radar, not just demonstrating that I was a fan of the club, obviously, and available, but it was more saying, well, look, I'm working in this area of the industry. I'm working in social media. The brand I worked with at the time, Deezer, was a French brand, and I was managing localization essentially, because I was managing their English language channels. So it was kind of proving to them that I had some demonstrable skills, and I could apply what I was doing on a day-to-day basis with them. And it was just good fortune, really. So I can't say that I was a standout candidate and I thought, we've got to get this guy on board. It was the opposite, really. It took years until the suitable role came up. So that role actually was with Dugout. So the role that the reason I started working in football was because there was a platform called Dugout. They've since been bought out by OneFootball, so it's not as visible now. But it was a video platform that was owned by 10 of the biggest clubs in football. Each of those clubs owned a share, 5% stake in the business. And some of those clubs, they had what was called a digital media editor. So they would have someone based within those clubs, Barca being one, who would manage the daily content for the platform. So I think, as you said, Jamie, it's a really good point that lots of clubs, even the biggest clubs, are under resourced sometimes. It's not so simple that they can say, right, we're gonna take on this new platform. They need a resource within the team who can manage that. And so what Dugout did essentially said, well, look, we will pay for the resource that you'll have. They'll be based 24/7 in club, but we'll kind of manage them, and we'll manage the strategy on our side. So because they were based in London, and they were basically an English language company, essentially, that's how I got on board. So I was in Barcelona at that point. I'd been working with the club for a number of years, and they thought, okay, well, we've got this project where we need a native English speaker, and we have this guy here who's apparently desperate to work for us. And they called me in for an interview, and that was kind of how it started.
So before we get angry Barcelona and PSG executives calling me and Jamie and saying, why are you encouraging people to bully you? So I know this maybe not my initial thought would be you Tom, were lucky and you're in the right place at the right time. But as we've touched upon, Jamie, in our previous episodes, there's always something new. So there might be a TikTok expert or a Twitch expert, and maybe Barcelona or PSG or the biggest clubs aren't as developed there. So these types of things, like you've been saying, develop your niche and be persistent. That can still be a valid suggestion, a valid recommendation today, I think.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I'm going to jump in because we work certainly at Barca, and Tom, I'm sure, has got loads of anecdotes on how they do it in Samba. And we work with Twitch streamers or TikTokers and externals because they've got the influence already, and they can show us kind of how this stuff's done, and we do work with them. So yeah.
I think that's the way that the digital landscape has developed. Anyway, I think there's it's impossible to have adequate expertise in all of those areas. I mean, when social started, it was Facebook and basically Twitter and then Instagram eventually. And it was fairly easy to be a social media manager and just understanding the nuances of Facebook, the functionality of the platform, how paid works, these kind of things. Twitter's slightly different beast, but then there's Instagram, and now there's TikTok, and then there's there's all the millions of failed platforms in between. And each one of them is different. Each one of them is catered to a different audience. I mean, and also the creators themselves, the people who excel on those platforms. If you're good on YouTube, and you understand that platform, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to, engage with the same audience on Twitch, equally for anything else. So I think that as the landscape changes, as new platforms come and go, as new trends come and go, it's impossible to be able to cover that. I mean, and the people that do it very well are the ones that lead in our industry. So Barca are fantastic for this. I mean, the people in the digital team at Barca, people like Eric Serra, Georgina Ledger, all the team, your team, with Barca Video, they're all fantastic because they understand, I'm not just saying this, it's true. It's just one of the reasons why Barca are a leader, because everyone in those teams understands the changing nature of digital. They understand, what it is that engages with different audiences on different platforms, etc., etc. And those that understand that best and rapidly are the ones that are going to lead. So, yeah.
And Barca do a lot of that in-house, but of course the other option is that they go to a company like yours and they get Samba, who kind of have all their fingers in the many pies, and they've got various contacts on the ground in the countries, as well as working deeply in the platform to bring in their expertise as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a dual approach, isn't it? I mean, if you can have the resource to have people full-time, and I think so Barca have understood this for years, and they've brought in young people, people who have got potential, and they've grown into those roles. But other clubs, even large clubs, maybe don't have the resource, or they need something that's a bit faster moving. It can be dependent on so many different areas. It can be the culture of the club, but it can also be the culture of the country and the work environment. It can be things like legal things. Like sometimes it can be very hard in some countries to bring in new people, and especially in football, digital budgets are incredibly difficult to maneuver sometimes. So that's often a reason why big brands work with agencies inside and outside of sport. They'll say, well, actually, if we can just bring in a freelancer to manage this for us, or an external agency, we can get going immediately. That is often one way that we work with clients from the outset, is that they work with us because we know that they can give us a brief, we can pitch to them, and within a week we can get going on it. We're incredibly nimble in that respect because we have people in so many different industries, so many different disciplines and specialities. And I think that's one of the plus points of working with an agency or externals, as you say. Pick up the phone to someone who's got 500,000 followers on Twitch and say, right, we've got El Clasico this weekend, we want to do something. What have we got? That's often the way that those conversations start.
Sure. So I guess maybe for you the benefit of doing this agency work after spending all the time contacting the clubs to end up working for an agency? Is the agency almost more satisfying or more because you're working with different clubs at the same time? Is that what you say is a benefit of doing that agency work, because it's not just one club and one set of ideas?
Absolutely. I mean, there are pros and cons to both approaches. I mean, if you work club side, I suppose you've got a bit more of a myopic approach, which can be good because you can be more focused on one thing. When you're working agency side, you don't have that luxury. You're working in different markets, different clients, different types of clients. It's incredibly fast moving. But yeah, the benefit is you learn incredibly quickly. And really, I think, no client is going to say no to new ideas. If you go to them and say, look, we've got an opportunity to do something here, they're going to say, well, fantastic. If this is your niche and this is your specialty, then go for it. That's harder to do in a club because you've got to make a pitch, and it's got to be part of a much more expansive sort of domestic strategy sometimes. So yeah, the pros and cons of both. But one of the things I really like about working agency side is how fast moving it is, and also the fact, like I said, it is true that we work with really nice clients. They're really open, very friendly, and because we've had long-lasting relationships with most of the clients we have, they're incredibly trusting of us as well. So that's I've been able to thrive in that environment, I think, because they've been so open to new ideas.
Okay, so kind of bringing this a bit almost full circle, we do ask for a lesson every episode. Before we get to that, I want to kind of maybe before a lesson, what advice would you give someone that's maybe in university now, or maybe working in a different sector that wants to pivot? Before I get into any one concrete sort of lesson that you've learned on your journey to working in sport media, what would your kind of advice be to someone? Would you recommend that they start contacting all these big brands and bully them, or maybe learn a language? I quite often say learn a language, not necessarily to go and work somewhere else, but I don't know, thinking if I were at Manchester United now and I were a Portuguese speaker, it's more likely that I'd get to interview Ronaldo than the other guy that doesn't speak Portuguese. What would your kind of advice be to people that are studying sport journalism or studying something unrelated but want to get into sport media or whatever?
I would say the advice I would give, and this isn't just exclusive to sport, but it's probably especially true of sport, is that it's an incredibly open industry. So it's not like, for example, if you want to work in engineering, well, you need a degree for that. You can't get into a job as a surgeon with contacts, but you can do that in sport. You can do that in media jobs. So I'd say that I would keep things as open-minded as possible, but don't just rely on when you see, job advertisements on Guardian Jobs or LinkedIn. Make contacts, get advice from people, put your name out there. And like we said earlier on, it's about finding your niche. So maybe it is languages. That's a really good point. Being based in the UK, but being a fluent Spanish speaker, for example, will give you an incredible advantage over anyone else. But maybe it's a specialism in a particular platform. Maybe it's in a particular market where you've got contacts, these kind of things. So like I said, going back to my experience, I knew that I didn't have qualifications. I knew that I didn't have relevant work experience. And I knew that I had to kind of do that as an extracurricular activity. That was something I'd have to do on my own time. I couldn't just, I couldn't sell myself to a big brand without those kind of contacts and experience. So I think it's the low-hanging fruit really is, make contacts immediately and reach out to people in jobs that you want to do. And basically say, well, how did you do that? What do I need? So you're there. I want to get there. How do I get from where I am now to that position? That's essentially it. And you'll find that people are incredibly receptive and welcoming to things like that.
That's always good to hear in this era that your experience of reaching out to strangers essentially has been so positive. Do you have any networking tips? Do you just have a really nice opening line, or is it just completely random or a bit of trial and error?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When I'm going back, when I was doing that with Barca, as you say, but maybe I shouldn't have used this word, but bullying those clubs, it was different era then. It wasn't the same. I'm not sure that would work now. It wasn't that long ago, but maybe at least 7-8 years ago. And at Barca, I think at that point there were maybe 2 English speakers that worked for the club, and they were freelancers. It wasn't like it is now, where they have a wide team of native English speakers or people with different languages. What I would say is, in all networking, it's about being, approaching. It's about being nice, isn't it? So it's like saying, if you're going to contact someone, don't go in immediately with what you want. Go into them and say, look, I'm in this position. I'm coming from, what I'm trying to get really is advice. Just trying to get a bit of FaceTime with someone in the industry who can help me, and really leading from that, saying that you don't have any expectations. You're not asking for a job. You're not asking for a reference. you would just like 5 minutes of time, a Zoom call, a phone call, meet up and have a coffee, or even just a bit of a chat via LinkedIn or something like that, and say, well, in your experience, how have you done it? What would you advise someone in my position to do? And like I said, I cannot imagine that anyone would turn around and say, I'm too busy for that. I've always had good results when I've done things like that.
That's great to hear. I think in a similar sense, Stuart and I have had a similar experience. We've been reaching out to people to come on the podcast. Obviously, Tom, you and I know each other. We've had a couple of people on that I know, but we've had some people that we don't know. And it's all come about in a similar way that, you get in touch, you start a conversation about something specific to them, and open a sort of dialogue. And like you say, it's surprising how receptive people can be. I've had people contact me and say, hey, it's amazing, you're working in Barca or you're working in MotoGP or whatever, and ask about that route. And yeah, if you're listening, like, hey, I'll make myself available. Get in touch.
And you'll be surprised. I mean, it's the kind of thing that when you turn those connections into a position or an opportunity, it feels, you forget how you felt before you had that connection. So, you never know what's going to come out of something like that. So, for example, someone might contact you, Jamie, and say, "Oh, I saw you work at Barca. That's amazing. I'm a native Spanish speaker and I'm looking for a job." Okay, so you might not have a role available at the moment, but there could be a time in the future where the team are overworked or something, or you need someone who's bilingual, and you think, there's a guy who actually called me and he's based here, or he's available and he's he understands the role, and then an opportunity comes out of that. So you never know. I think it's about visibility at the end of the day, isn't it? It's like putting your name and your experience in front of as many different people as possible, and showing that you're someone that's approachable and that's nice to work with, and something might come from that.
Yeah, and even I'm certainly in no position to hire anyone. It's far from my job role.
Not yet, Jamie, not yet.
Not yet.
I hope never.
It's
not the sort of thing that interests me. I want to keep making content, but we have conversations. We have conversations about people, and quite often we will talk about someone's YouTube channel, someone's Twitch channel, or someone that contacted us, and it would be surprising how often opportunities arise, even if they're just one-offs or just little things that we maybe need, and I would imagine that's the same of anywhere.
I've hired someone recently actually that was an intern at PSG for me, and he came in for a couple of weeks, and just a really nice guy. I didn't have any opportunities until recently for him, but then as soon as I did, he was front of mind because I'd had a good experience with him. I knew his skill set, and sometimes it can take a long time. Like I said, with me, it wasn't the fact that I didn't. To be clear, I didn't phone up Barca and ask for a job. It took years of staying on their radar, showing that I was really desperate to work for them, and then. But when a role came available, they at least knew that I was, really willing and in some way able. So, you never know. You got to play the long game. I think it's not a transactional thing where you message someone, ask for advice, and then they contact you the next day and be like, "Oh, well, we've got a full-time role." It doesn't work like that. But if you're willing to say, "Look, if I put in the hours now, and in 5 years' time, I could be where I want to be. Is it worth it?" Well, I think it is. You've just got to kind of have that patience and that long-term mindset, and who knows what will happen.
Yes, I think that kind of sums up nicely and links back to when we spoke when you were our featured guest, Jamie, a couple of weeks ago. The best way to work in sports media is to work in sports media, to get out there, put the content out, do the research, and make sure, as with Tom, your intern from PSG, just do maybe that intern was getting you the pan au chocolat each day, and then you put on a smile on his face, did it well, and was polite and helpful, and then you stayed in mind. He stayed in your mind. So I think we can, yes, certainly advice I've heard elsewhere as well, that even if you aren't going to, as I said, see a job advertised for head of social media Real Madrid, you need to do more behind the scenes. You need to put yourself out there, network, be polite, be approachable, and then the things will pay off eventually.
Yeah, and I think also it's about knowing your niche, knowing your skill set as well. So some people will have a specific skill like languages, as you said, or they've got their own personal TikTok account, which is amazing, and that can bring value to a client. But one of the most valuable niches, one of the most valuable skills you can bring is just attitude, being hardworking, being open to new possibilities, being positive, and that I think will get you really far. I think the icing on the cake is, specific skills on top of that. But 80% of it, I think, is just having the right mindset and attitude that means that you're a nice person to work with, that you can be trusted, that people know you're going to make sacrifices to do the work, and that you can be counted on. That will take you a long way as well.
You've given so much advice and so much. I think there's loads to take away from this podcast. It is titled "So You Want to Work in Sport Media." If I can push you for one lesson, the most important thing you've learned working in sport media, or on your journey to working in sport media, what would it be, Tom?
Ooh, one lesson, that is hard. I
mean, you would have
suppose
given us quite a lot.
I just made attitude. I think so many of the opportunities I've had have come from just having the right attitude, not having expectations, but just, being available, showing that I'm positive and that I'm, hardworking. And I think ultimately, because you can't manufacture skills and experience, you can't go into a role and instantly know what to do. But if you have the right mindset and you say, well, I'm going to learn in the job, I'm going to do whatever it takes to learn and to make up any gaps that I have, that is especially relevant when, in our context, or in my context, especially where I've come from a different industry. I can't hold up my CV and say I've got a degree and a master's here in sports management, because I can't say that I've had relevant work experience somewhere else, because I didn't. But actually having that thing of, well, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make up that gap, and I'm going to make as hard as I need to make this a success. I think that's the the key attribute that will enable you to switch paths and to make it successful.
Tom, I feel like we could talk for another hour yet, and probably going deeper into localization and agency work and content creation. Maybe you'll come on for another episode later on in the series and come back and talk to us some more.
Well, we've got some great people at Samba. I'm very happy to put you in contact with some of the other guys, and I know you guys have highlighted the work that we did with eBay and PSG and stuff.
There's the eBay mention. It didn't come from us this time.
We've got eBay Janos into every episode.
Yeah.
So.
There you go. Well, the guys that I had a small part in that, but the guys that manage that on the ground, I think it'd be an interesting one to speak to.
Great.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute wealth of information and experience that you've passed on. And do you want to plug anything? Do you want to plug anything? Where can we find you?
Yes, I should. Our website, I think. Let me double check. sambadigital.com. I should know that. Here's what I would say. So we've got two products. Sambadigital.com is our main website. We have something that we launched a couple of months ago called Sports Translate. And I think that every time I speak to someone about it, they think, wow, this is amazing. What a resource. I wish I'd known about this sooner. And essentially, this is my sales pitch, but it's a one-stop shop for all translation for the sports industry. So, for example, if you need a press release translating, or you just want to, ad hoc in the moment, just, translate a couple of posts for Facebook, you can do that through Sports Translate. It's like Google Translate. You put in the copy, you send in the document, you send in the video file, whatever it is, and within a very, very tight time frame, whatever you need, it comes back to you, fully translated, fully localized by specialists in the area. I think if more people knew about this product, they would, use it eventually. It's fantastic if you've got, like I said, it's on Friday it's Republican Day in Turkey, for example. You want to put something out for your audience in Turkish, you put it in sportstranslate.com, and it comes back to you in seconds, and you go to go. So it's a really good tool. That's the thing that I would plug. I think could be really useful for people in the sports industry for sure.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We'll put it all in the show notes and the YouTube description and everything.
Please do. That'd be great.
And thanks again for joining us.
No problem. Anytime. Pleasure.
Thanks a lot, then, Tom. You can check out Tom's notes in the show notes, and don't remember to like, subscribe, and bully PSG. Thank you very much.